Recording in progress.
Well, good evening, everyone. Really appreciate folks joining tonight. We are here to do an asbestos informational session about the Roosevelt Elementary School in Keego Harbor. So my name is Jennifer Dixon, and I'm with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy's Air Quality Division. I'm going to be helping moderate the meeting tonight. I have a few housekeeping things to go through before we get into the meat of the evening tonight. So the first thing is your lines are going to be muted during the meeting. I've already gotten a couple requests of whether or not we're going to record the meeting and share it out. So yes, we definitely are going to do that. So the meeting is being recorded. As part of the follow-up to the meeting, after we're done tonight, we'll send out an email that will include a link to the recording, other links to information that we maybe talked about tonight, and hopefully some other information that you all might find helpful. One of the things that we like to do as we set up these meetings is work through our group norms. So this slide was actually developed with an advocacy group in the Flint area, and it just kind of helps us really set the stage for how we expect these meetings to go. So we really want folks to listen actively with an ear to understanding. I mean, obviously we're here to talk about some things that are going on in your community, and we hope they're very helpful. We definitely want you to ask questions and request clarification on things that we're talking about. We want to be sure that we're criticizing ideas and not individuals. So those folks that are here with us tonight from the agencies and other fellow community members, we want to just make sure we're communicating respectfully with each other. And then we always advise that people take space and make space, which just means let everyone have a chance to ask a question if they would like to do so. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on this in a couple of slides, but how things are going to work tonight. Primarily, the gist of it, the big picture is we're going to have some staff here from the Michigan, from MIOSHA and from EGLE, doing a presentation about some of the activities that we are participating in at the elementary school. And then we're going to open it up to question and answer. So again, I'll give a little bit more details on how those two sections are going to go. So how to ask a question tonight. So first thing, I want to really acknowledge that folks that were planning to attend the meeting, community members, had a lot of great questions for us. It really helped us to put our presentation together and hopefully give you a lot of the information that you were looking for. Hopefully most of you are aware of the Keego Harbor Roosevelt Elementary School webpage that we set up that we were hopeful would answer some of those questions. There's also a frequently asked questions portion of that. And I know Caitlin will share those out in the chat in just a little bit here, and we'll also go over those again at the end of the meeting. But so that was great to have people's questions right in the beginning, just to help us get this presentation ready for you. There was a lot of questions that were outside of our purview, outside of EGLE's asbestos units purview and outside of MIOSHA's asbestos purview, but we'll talk a little bit about how we might be able to get you all answers to those as well. So there was some that came in a little bit towards the end of our planning that I know we're not going to be able to answer for you tonight, but we will do our best. And then we'll have you type those questions into the chat box. And again, I will definitely remind people how to do that once we get to that part of the evening. And then if we do have people that are phoning in, which it does look like we have a few of those folks, if you're phoning in only and you're not joining by computer and you can't type in, we'll just remind you how you can raise your hand to ask a question. All right, so let's go a little bit over the agenda for tonight. So the first thing I want to do is introduce the other staff that I have here with me tonight to help go through this presentation and answer questions. Like I said, I'm Jennifer Dixon, but if the rest of my staff could go ahead and just turn your cameras on for a minute here, I want to just run through everybody and so folks know who is on the line. So a couple of people that you're going to be hearing the most from, besides myself, are going to be Tammy Bell, and she's our asbestos unit manager. So she's going to be doing our EGLE sort of portion of the presentation tonight. And then we also have Joe Savage. He is here from MIOSHA's asbestos unit, and he's going to be talking about their part of this project as well. We also have a couple other folks here from EGLE. I have Ivan Bell and Stephen Kidder. They're here to listen along. They're asbestos inspectors here at EGLE, and this is going to really help them with the work that's going on there and their response to these community concerns. And I also have a couple of folks here on the background that are just helping us with our technology so that hopefully the meeting goes well. And that is Caitlin DeVries and Natalie Brown, and they are with our environmental support division. So thanks to all of you for helping us out tonight. Really, really appreciate that. Tammy, if you want to leave your camera on, because I'm going to be passing it over to you in just a minute. But if everybody else wants to go ahead and turn your cameras off, you can do that now. All right. So as far as the agenda goes, we're really going to be focusing on what EGLE's role is. I think there's some miscommunication or some misunderstanding of what our purview is. So hopefully this will really help you guys understand a little bit more about how we enforce the asbestos NESHAP. And Tammy's going to go into a lot more detail on that. So if that word NESHAP just sounded like a bunch of letters that I put together, I promise she's going to be explaining that to you in a lot more detail. And then we're going to talk really about what work we have done at the elementary school so far. Then we're going to invite Joe to come in, and he's going to really talk about MIOSHA's role. Even though our roles are similar in some ways, they definitely are different. And so we're going to try to parse some of that out, and hopefully that will also be helpful. Then we're going to get to that question and answer portion. And like I said, we've tried to incorporate answers to a lot of your questions in our presentation today. Hopefully we get to a lot of them. That was our goal. So once we get to that question and answer, if we haven't answered your question, you didn't get what you needed out of it, you don't feel like the resources were there, and it is within our purview to be able to answer that, we'll definitely do that. So then we'll open up that Q&A portion. Once we get through that, I'll talk a little bit about some of those other resources. Like I mentioned, Caitlin will be sharing links to things in the chat as we're talking, as it's appropriate to do so. So hopefully you can grab those. Like I said, I know some folks are calling in, and so you won't be able to necessarily see those right now, but we will share those out via email. I will tell you how to contact us and how you can file a complaint if you have one. And I just want to mention that because folks that are calling in, we will give contact information. So if you want to be ready to jot that down, either the email address or the phone number, if you aren't on the email list, we'd love to add you onto there. If you don't have email and you really just need to have your communication in a different way via phone or whatever, we're happy to take a phone call as well. So lots of different ways to get a hold of us, lots of different ways to let us know that you need more information. All right, so we're going to get into the EGLE asbestos program, but the first thing that I want to do is just talk a little bit about the air quality division and what our role is sort of holistically, bigger picture wise. We don't just do asbestos work. The division is really responsible for regulating sources of air pollutants. Our goal behind that is to protect human health and the environment. So these meetings are really important to us. We do a lot of meetings because our primary role is to regulate industrial sources of air pollution. So think about manufacturing facilities, concrete crushing, batch plants, the asphalt industry. This slide is a little bit misleading because we do not regulate cows. That's not our department. And we also don't regulate mobile sources of emissions. So our focus really is on those industrial sources. And we have a big team of people that does inspections, that works on evaluating permit applications to make sure that they meet those air quality rules and regulations. A big variety of work. We run an air monitoring network across the state. So we do a lot of other things outside of asbestos, but asbestos is also one of our really important programs. But I wanted to give you just a bit of a background on what our division does holistically so you can understand a little bit more how that asbestos program fits in. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Tammy, and you should be able to take it away whenever you are ready. And then just make sure you unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties again. So hi, my name is Tammy Bell. I'm the asbestos unit manager. Sorry, something's going, okay. Let me start over. Tammy Bell, asbestos unit manager for about a year. I've been an asbestos inspector with EGLE about 12 years. I manage 8 asbestos inspectors across the state. two are which Ivan and Steve. Okay. So the asbestos rules that EGLE enforces are the National Emission Standard for Asbestos, which is 40 CFR Part 61 Subpart M, which is an EPA regulation. The state regulation was adopted by reference in Rule 942. Sorry, is that? Okay, apologize for that. I'm not sure what's going on here. What is EGLE's role in demolitions? So EGLE Air Quality Division has been delegated to implement the asbestos NESHAP program for asbestos in the state of Michigan. The NESHAP protects the public and environment by minimizing the release of asbestos fibers during renovation and demolition activities. What our program can't do. So we do not have the ability to regulate asbestos concerns that fall outside of our authority to enforce the NESHAP. For example, if you live in an apartment building and there is asbestos pipe insulation in your apartment building and it's in poor condition, that's not a demolition or a renovation, so we don't have authority. Another question we get a lot is if a structure catches on fire. Now, obviously, if it catches on fire, it's going to disturb asbestos, but because that's not a renovation or demolition, we don't have jurisdiction over that. And there's been some concern, I guess, about ceiling that had collapsed in the school. And we also did not have authority over that because, again, if it just collapsed and it wasn't due to a renovation or a demolition, we don't have any jurisdiction over that. EGLE also does not have the authority to decide when an asbestos abatement or demolition will occur. What do EGLE inspectors do? So in 2024, we received 95,085 notifications. Those are the 10-day notifications for asbestos abatement, demolition. We have some that are called emergency notifications. And that is a mixture of original notifications and revised ones. So the NESHAP basically says you have to keep your information updated, and those are called revisions. We have 8 inspectors, like I said, that cover the entire state. And what we do is we review the submitted notifications. We conduct inspections of demolition, renovation, and asbestos abatement projects. We respond to complaints and conduct enforcement actions when necessary. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the actions we've taken to date at the school. So in 2024, we did have inspectors go out to the school and review some of the areas of plaster, and we did take, I think it was 5 samples of plaster. We didn't find asbestos in the samples we took, and so we took, for example, we took a sample in room 109. There was a sample taken in room 202, sample in the balcony, room 208 ceiling, and one of the walls in room 303. August 28th, so we did go back out to the site after we received a notification. And the purpose of that was because during the time that the project was on hold, we were still receiving complaints and concerns. So we did go out there and we met with the school district, the consultant, and the abatement contractor. And then most recently on the 15th, staff went out there, and the purpose was that asbestos abatement had started at the school. So an inspection was conducted of the work that was being performed by environmental maintenance engineers, which is the abatement contractor. And during that visit, no violations were noted. I'm just going to discuss some helpful definitions as we go along. So the first definition is renovation, which is altering a facility or one or more components in any way, including the stripping or removal of regulated asbestos-containing materials. The next one is demolition, which is the wrecking or taking out of any load-supporting structures. And then abatement is the process of safely managing asbestos in buildings by removing, encapsulating, repairing, or enclosing asbestos-containing materials to prevent release of hazardous fibers in the air. The reason I am bringing up renovation and demolition because there had been some concern that maybe the wrong notification was filed initially for the project. And if you're doing an asbestos abatement project, that actually falls under the definition of renovation. So when the contractor submits the notification, they check the renovation box. And then when the demolition contractor comes along at some point, they fill out, it's pretty much the same notification, but they are checking the demolition boxes, and then they will, it will have them complete certain sections of the notification that just apply to the demolition. A couple more helpful definitions. The first one is friable asbestos, which is any material containing more than 1% asbestos that, when dry, can be crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to powder by hand pressure. And non-friable asbestos, in general, is any material containing more than 1% asbestos, when dry, cannot be crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to powder by hand pressure. And regulated asbestos-containing materials. So the NESHAP requires that regulated asbestos-containing materials be removed prior to demolition. So a regulated asbestos-containing material is friable asbestos-containing material or non-friable asbestos-containing material that is friable. So imagine you have some floor tile that's in very poor condition, or it may become friable during the demolition or renovation process. And the reason I bring this up is because our notifications are public. So if any of you choose to view those, you may look at the notification and say, well, I don't think all the asbestos is on here. And that's because the NESHAP just requires the contractor, or I should say the owner and operator, to only report regulated asbestos-containing materials. That doesn't mean they're not removing non-friable asbestos. It just means they don't have to report that on the notification. And here's some examples of asbestos-containing materials. So you have pipe wrap, which is considered a friable. It's a regulated asbestos-containing material. Textured ceiling material, that is a regulated asbestos-containing material. And then you have some examples of non-friable material, which is, transite siding. It's made of a cementitious material. It's not something you can crush with hand pressure. Depending on how it was removed or if it got run over by an excavator, it could definitely become friable. So you have to be careful of those things. The same with floor tile. If floor tile is in good condition, it's probably non-friable. But if it was left in place and a demolition contractor ran over this, they could likely crush it into powder. So, who is responsible for compliance with the NESHAP? The asbestos NESHAP holds all owners and operators, and in general, the operator is what we consider the contractor, of subject facilities liable for compliance with the regulation. So that means even municipalities, school systems, and church organizations are responsible for compliance. EGLE asbestos inspectors will issue violations when warranted to hold responsible parties accountable to the law. And I'm just going to read the requirements in a nutshell. If you want more information, we can pass along our website. We have some fact sheets. But in general, the owner and operator are required to conduct a thorough inspection for asbestos, submit notification to EGLE 10 days prior to asbestos abatement and/or demolition. So one of the questions that was asked is, about the demolition. So there is a notification for asbestos abatement. At some point, there will be a notification submitted by the demolition contractor letting us know they're going to start demolition in 10 days. And sometimes they put the notification in even earlier than that. Sometimes we get 15 days, sometimes we get 20, but they have to do at least 10 days. The owner and operator are required to follow work practices to control asbestos emissions, such as wetting asbestos-containing materials and containment and labeling asbestos waste. They need to properly dispose of regulated asbestos at a landfill that accepts asbestos waste. And they need to have a trained asbestos contractor supervisor on site during asbestos abatement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about asbestos surveys. The NESHAP requires a thorough inspection prior to demolition or renovation. However, the NESHAP does not define exactly what a thorough inspection is. It does not list specific materials that must be sampled. It just says, do a thorough inspection. The EPA has guidelines that determine how many samples to collect during a survey. Surveys should be destructive whenever possible. EGLE does not approve asbestos surveys. We may look them over, we may give additional sampling recommendations, or we may collect compliance samples during an inspection, but it is the owner and operator's responsibility to conduct a thorough inspection. A little bit about notification requirements. So there are threshold amounts of asbestos that have to be triggered before a facility is subject. And I won't go into that too much except to say this project is over the threshold amounts for square footage of plaster. It may actually be, I'd have to check, it's probably over the amount for pipe as well, but don't quote me on that, I'd have to double check. So all subject demolitions, regardless of whether regulated asbestos-containing materials are present or not, require a notification. So if someone did an asbestos survey and they did not find any asbestos, we would still require a notification letting us know that the building was going to be demolished. And when I say subject demolitions, again, there are certain buildings that we don't regulate. For instance, privately owned homes, we don't regulate work in those types of situations. Renovation involving regulated asbestos at or above the threshold limits, that also requires notification for asbestos abatement. So that's why you'll see one for Roosevelt, because it is over the threshold. And this is just a picture of our notification that the contractor has to fill out. And I apologize, it is kind of small. But if you go on the public website, these are publicly available. It should have the original document and any revisions that the contractor submits. I looked before this meeting, and I think this is revision 3. As of yesterday, there is a revision 4. So you can go on there and take a look at that. Just some sections of the document. Here is section 1, and you can see where this is abatement, so they check plan renovation. They are required to, for this project, you can see where it says EGLE, and then it says EGLE and MIOSHA. They are required to notify both agencies that they're going to be conducting asbestos abatement. There's a section, facility description, where they give the name, they give the address. It does say the specific locations that at the time of this notification, they were planning on doing work in. A little bit about asbestos removal. So ACM must be removed prior to demolition or renovation, except Category 1 non-friable that will remain in good condition throughout. So I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Category 2 non-friable that will not be crumbled, pulverized, or reduced to powder. What happens during asbestos abatement? Asbestos abatement rules are designed to protect not only the workers conducting asbestos abatement, but also the public. The asbestos abatement contractor, environmental maintenance engineers, is licensed by the state of Michigan. Asbestos abatement is being conducted under negative pressure glove bag, negative pressure enclosure. Enclosures must maintain negative pressure with air filtration. Water must be used to control dust and keep the material adequately wet. Any asbestos waste must be properly packaged, labeled, and disposed of. A visual inspection and air sampling will occur after asbestos abatement. Now, some of this information on this slide, sorry, they were coming in with the vacuum. Some of the information on this slide, Joe Savage, when he talks about the MIOSHA regulations, he may touch more a little bit on this, but this is just kind of the overall basics. So what happens if more asbestos is identified? Additional sampling may be required if additional asbestos-containing materials are discovered through additional asbestos sampling during asbestos abatement. So what we see a lot during asbestos abatement is the owner and operator are responsible to make sure all regulated asbestos-containing materials are removed. So it's very common for them to go back through certain areas, take the survey, verify that things were sampled. They will also do additional intrusive sampling. So it could be that the asbestos inspector went out and they identified pipe and they provided an estimate of the amount of pipe, but the abatement contractor will actually go through and knock holes in the walls and the ceilings to try to find the pipe and make sure it's all abated. Or during a compliance inspection, sometimes we will go out and collect samples, and if those test positive, we will communicate that information to the owner and operator so they can incorporate that into their abatement plan. The abatement contractor may be required to revise their notification depending on the amount or type of asbestos found. So if I went out there and I found some non-friable floor tile under carpet, because it's non-friable, and if they don't make it friable, they wouldn't necessarily have to put that on their notification. But if we found more friable material and it was 20% more or less what they had on their notification, they would be required to update it. Or if you found a brand new friable or regulated asbestos containing material that was not listed before, they would have to update that as well. There were a lot of questions regarding air monitoring. So it's our understanding air monitoring will be conducted during the project by the school district. Our air quality rules do not allow us to require air monitoring or sharing of results during demolition or abatement. The asbestos NESHAP does not discuss air monitoring at all. So we don't really have any jurisdiction over it. If there's any questions about samples or sample results, those would best be answered by the school district. How you can protect yourself during demolitions. The chance of asbestos fibers leaving containment areas are very low. You can stay away from demolition sites, keep windows and doors closed during demolition activities, clean dust inside your home with water and use a HEPA filter when vacuuming, wipe down pets with a damp cloth after outdoor activities, and keep yard dust down with water. And now I'm going to turn it over to Joe Savage so we can talk about the MIOSHA asbestos program.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. Let me take control of this PowerPoint real quick. All right. Yeah, so I just want to take a few minutes to cover MIOSHA's role at an asbestos site and go over what the MIOSHA asbestos program covers. So my name's Joe Savage. I'm an enforcement industrial hygienist with the Construction Safety Health Division of MIOSHA. I've been with MIOSHA for about 5 years now. My actual title is Industrial Hygiene Specialist for the asbestos program, and I cover the entire state of Michigan. The asbestos program, we cover 5 asbestos laws for the state. Public Act 135, the Asbestos Abatement Contractors Licensing Act, Public Act 440, the Worker Accreditation Act, the MIOSHA Standard Part 305, which is asbestos standards for general industry, MIOSHA Standard Part 602, asbestos standards for construction, and then AHERA, which is the Asbestos in Schools Law. MIOSHA, we review AHERA. We're the courtesy agency for AHERA, but EPA Region 5 enforces AHERA. Oh, so I lost control. Oh, there we go. So Public Act 135, it was an act to provide for the licensing and regulations of asbestos abatement contractors. Asbestos abatement contractors must be licensed by our program, the asbestos program, to engage in any activity involving the demolition, renovation, or encapsulation of friable asbestos-containing materials. Their license is good for 1 year. They're not grandfathered into the system. They have to reapply every single year for it. And we also have a notification requirement. So an asbestos abatement contractor shall notify the department in writing at least 10 days before beginning an asbestos abatement project exceeding 10 linear feet or 15 square feet or both of those friable asbestos-containing materials. Again, non-friable materials we do not require a notification for. And it's not good enough for us just that the contractor be licensed. We also require individuals who are going to work with asbestos to be licensed or accredited. So Public Act 440 was an act to provide for the accreditation of persons who perform asbestos-related work in schools, school buildings, and public and commercial buildings. There's 5 disciplines that someone can get accredited in. You have contractor supervisor, worker, inspector, management planner, and project designer. In order to become accredited in the state of Michigan, you must first take an initial class, depending on what discipline you want. You have an initial class, and then every year, to maintain the accreditation, they must take a refresher class. These laws, both Public Act 134 and 440, they do have some teeth built into it too. So if someone is non-compliant with these acts, with 135, the Licensing Act, since we're the ones that issue the license, we also have the authority to deny, suspend, or revoke that license. We can also issue civil penalties of up to $25,000 for violating that act. Same thing with Public Act 440. If we can deny, suspend, or revoke an accreditation, and we can issue civil penalties up to $10,000. And for the training, we want to make sure that these accredited persons are being trained to our standards. So they can't just go get training from anyone. They must be trained by a MIOSHA sponsored trainer. These trainers provide the initial refresher and examinations. MIOSHA itself, we do not give any training. And for a trainer to become sponsored by us, they must first be approved by our department before holding the class. They too have to submit notifications to us so that at least 7 days before they hold the class, so that I can come out and audit their class, make sure that their curriculum meets the requirement of the EPA Model Accreditation Plan and our Public Act 440. And then once they're done with the class, they must send us a list of those students and their certificates. So when the students come to us asking for an accreditation, we can verify that they did see an accredited trainer or a sponsored trainer. And again, since we give the approval for it, we can deny, suspend, or revoke a sponsored trainer. The other act that we cover is the MIOSHA Standard Part 305 in general industry. Currently at this site, there is no general industry activities going on. 305 does not apply. So moving on to Part 602. Now, the MIOSHA mission is to help protect the safety and health of Michigan workers. That's our jurisdiction at a site enforcing these MIOSHA standards. We only have jurisdiction over employer-employee relationships. So I just grabbed a couple key points out of the standard. This is by no means all the requirements out of Part 602, just some of the big bullet points I wanted to go over with you. And they're not really in any particular order. So let me just go over these with you real quick. In order to do an asbestos abatement, you have to set it up in a regulated area, which is an area that they demarcate so that only authorized trained personnel can enter these areas. They have to have a competent person overseeing the activities, and that is a defined term in Part 602. For this site particular, they would need someone that is that 40-hour contractor supervisor trained to oversee it. They also have to decontaminate. So before they leave a regulated area where they're doing asbestos abatement, the employees have to decontaminate themselves. And at this particular site, being that it's plaster, it's a class 1 material, they have to go through a 3-stage decon that includes a shower. So the employees have to strip down, completely shower, get all that asbestos off them before they leave. Before they begin work, they must determine the presence, location, and quantity of asbestos in their work site. Additionally, while they're doing the work, they have to have engineering controls, such as wet methods, vacuum cleaners equipped with HEPA vacuums, as well as prompt disposal of debris in leak-tight containers. They also have to have, depending on what the work they're doing, they have to have specific engineering controls. As Tammy mentioned earlier, they're using glove bags and negative pressure enclosures. And a negative pressure enclosure is where they take plastic, usually it's plastic, and they completely seal off their work area. And then inside that work area, they put negative pressure, negative air machines that have to go through a HEPA filter, and it pulls and cycles that air. They're legally required to cycle the air inside that work area at least 4 times an hour through those HEPA filters. And then it takes that cleaned air and it dumps it outside, pulling negative pressure in the work area. And what that does is if there's any punctures, rips, tears in those plastic walls inside their containment, it's going to pull that outside air into that dirty, contaminated air, and then hopefully through the through those HEPA rated filters. Generally, there's always an outside person monitoring this kind of thing. So if there is a breach in the containment, they can hurry and patch it real quick. They do have monitors set up, manometers set up that alarm if they lose pressure. And these are all things that I've seen. I do have an open inspection at the site with EME. These are things that I have seen on site. Additionally, they have to inform employees of what is and what isn't asbestos in their work area. That way, no one inadvertently gets exposed to asbestos. They must properly train their employees how to handle these materials. I've reviewed the employee list for this site. All the employees, except for one, are 40-hour trained. The other individual is 32-hour worker, and that individual is not doing any supervisory duties. The workers also have to wear respiratory protection while they're doing this. And protective clothing. So yeah, they're going to decontaminate themselves, but they need to have that extra layer to keep this stuff, off their skin, off their body. Additionally, while they're working, there has to be done a personal exposure air monitoring done on the workers while they're removing this, so that the employer can know exactly what level of asbestos exposure these employees are being exposed to. And then lastly, before they can tear down that containment and move on, they have to get a post-abatement clearance. It's both visual and an air clearance, and that is done by an independent third party. One thing I wanted to point out before I go on to the next slide is you'll notice all these laws, it's to keep the asbestos out of the air. Asbestos is most dangerous as an airborne dust. If we can keep it out of the air, we can keep it out of people's lungs. That's the main goal here. And so how it all comes together to protect people and the environment. So from your big view up, you have Public Act 135 that regulates, license, monitors these companies doing the work. Then Public Act 440, it's training for the individual and keeping them individually accountable to that they do the work properly. MIOSHA Part 602, that's employee protections, monitoring, and record keeping of these things. Then you have the EGLE and NESHAP, which is to protect the environment and the public. And then lastly, you have the inspectors such as me and Tammy and Ivan and everyone else that goes out and boots on the ground and inspects these contractors and these projects in person. That's it for my part.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe. Greatly appreciate that. Thanks to you as well, Tammy. Appreciate you guys walking through a lot of information. And it sounds like to me, there's a lot of ways these rules work together. Like you mentioned, oh, hold on a second there. Not sure. Keep our presentation going. There's a lot of checks and balances in place to keep not only the workers safe, but also, as you mentioned in the very end, Joe, to ensure that any asbestos fibers aren't leaving the site. That's our whole goal here. So Tammy, if you don't mind turning your camera on, we're going to get into the question and answer portion. There was a few other questions that I know had come in, and we thought we would just, talk through them before we get to questions that are coming in from folks that are on tonight. So we'll just kind of walk through these one by one. And if I'm being honest right now, I'm not sure who's going to handle these. So Tammy, I'm going to pass it to you first. And if you are not the one that's going to answer it, just go ahead and you can send that to Joe. But one of the questions that we received as we were prepping for this was, can the West Bloomfield School Board apply for the demo permit before the abatement is done? And if so, when? And I know you did talk a little bit about the timing that's required for that demolition notification. I know you showed on the notification form where they have to check something different. And so if you could just talk a little bit about that timing, I think that could be helpful for people.
So this asks specifically for a demo permit, and we don't issue demo permits. However, if the question was regarding a demolition notification, they can enter that notification in whenever they want. I mean, they could do it today, but they can't start until, all the rackham is removed.
And yeah, and just, I know we have, I realized on the slide, we did a lot of rackham, we did ACM. So just repeating that that's regulated asbestos containing material and asbestos containing material. We can also go back through some of those definitions if those are helpful, because there are some very specific things that seem like they would be something, but in the world of asbestos, they're a little bit different. So the second question that we had here was, is there a 10-day wait period for a demo permit? And I know we talked, it's not a permit, but for the demolition notification, like the asbestos notification, the asbestos statement notification, sorry.
There is one. It will be separately filed by whoever the demolition contractor is. Same form. It's just it requires different sections to be filled out.
And then you talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but I know we've had some other people join, and this is one of the big questions that we have. So why is the amount of plaster being removed less than the 65,000 square feet that was mentioned way back in the very beginning? I know that number came up. We've had it, come back to us a little bit with questions, and the notification number didn't match that 65,000 number. So can you just talk a little bit more about that difference and why some things need to be on there and some things aren't?
So last year when we were out there was a recommendation given for plaster. We recommended that maybe they consider removing it all. It wasn't based on violation. It wasn't based on any samples that we collected. It was just a recommendation we gave out of abundance of caution. They do have a survey. They did take an extensive amount of samples, and it's my understanding that at this point, they are abating the rooms where they found actual positive asbestos results.
And I think we had talked about this in one of our prep meetings. So that's allowed under the asbestos NESHAP. So it's not like they're skirting the law or anything like that by doing it a different way. That's allowed by the NESHAP.
Yeah, and maybe if Joe doesn't mind, he could talk a little bit about how that works. They're not in violation. They just chose to narrow down and do more sampling to identify the areas that there was asbestos in the plaster. This is the second and third floor.
Yeah, I can definitely speak more on this. So essentially, my understanding of what happened here at this site was the school district is required to do these NESHAP pre-demolition surveys. They hired a consultant to come out do the survey, and the school, being 100 years old, has seen lots of renovations and maintenance and additions throughout the year. So when the inspector came in to do the asbestos survey, they weren't really able to delineate when this plaster versus that plaster was put in. So they just called it all one plaster. And legally, they're only required to take 7 samples of a surfacing material. And so they were really only required to take 7 samples of all the plaster in the school and make a determination. However, what they did is they took 10 samples from each floor, and they got about, I think, somewhere around 3 positives out of that. Now, those 3 positives, you only need one positive to call everything positive. And so that's what happened with our initial inspection. They called everything positive. And so with that, you have 2 options. You can either treat it all as positive and remove it, or you can do a much deeper in-depth inspection to really delineate those areas that contain asbestos. And that's what the school district opted to do. They then went in and took over 100 samples across all floors. And they got a couple more, I think it was somewhere like 5 or 7 positive samples from that. And with that, they were able to really delineate. They tested every wall and they tested every ceiling for asbestos. And with that, they were really able to narrow down and delineate the exact areas in the school that contain the asbestos plaster. And that's how they were able to reduce that 65,000 down to the about 10,000 that it is now.
Yeah, no, thanks for walking through that. I think that that's helpful. I also saw that we had a question, and before we move on from the plaster ceiling part of the discussion, and there might be other questions that come up about this too, but I did see one that was asking about how the plaster is sampled. So like logistically, if I'm you guys, like if Ivan goes out and he takes another sample of one of the plaster ceilings, like what exactly is he doing? Because the concern was, are we getting all the layers of the plaster? It's a 100-year-old building. How many times did they have to go in there and do resurfacing, that kind of thing. So I think there's a concern, like, are they just scraping the outside of it? What are they required to do? We heard a lot of discussion about, was this destructive sampling? Did it need to be destructive sampling? So I don't know, Tammy, if you guys can decide amongst yourself who's best to answer this, but I think that could be really helpful. How is that sampling actually conducted?
Yeah, Tim, do you want me to grab this one?
Sure.
Yeah. So sampling, when doing an asbestos survey, doing sampling, asbestos-containing materials, ACM, falls into 3 categories: miscellaneous, insulation or TSI, and surfacing material. Plaster is considered a surfacing material. So then it falls under the surfacing material requirements for sampling, which is the 3-5-7 rule. If it's less than 1,000 square feet, they're only required to take 3 samples. If it's less than 5,000 square feet, they only take 5 samples. And if it's greater than 5,000 square feet of material, then they have to take 7 samples. You're right, plaster is a multi-layered system. Generally, you can take samples different ways: destructive sampling, hammer, break it, get a small piece. You can use coring tools, whatever method you need to get an entire sample, all layers of that material. And those inspections, those sampling, are required to be done by an accredited Michigan asbestos inspector. They then have to be sent to an accredited lab that is accredited in NV lab, something like that. They have to be accredited to analyze those samples, and then the lab gives you a result. So an ACM is anything greater than 1% asbestos, and from the results that I've seen of this, they're testing around 2%.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's helpful. I guess in my head, I'm imagining when you say like a core, it's like you're getting like a round chunk out and it's all the layers, and then the lab is looking literally at all of those layers. And if any of those layers are, above those thresholds, then the whole thing is counting as plaster. Because again, the whole idea of this is to be conservative, to protect people, especially workers, because they're right there on top of it, but also the public that's, around the facility. So I think that's helpful. Hopefully we'll see if folks have other questions. But one of the last questions that we wanted to address before we get into the other ones that are coming in through the Q&A box is, did the roof and the first floor get tested? And if not, when will it be tested? And if it was, what was found? So Tammy, I think you did have some information on this one.
So is it the second copy of the survey? The second survey, which I think we received last year, there were some samples collected of the roof, and there were samples collected on the first floor. And during our site visit on the 28th, There was some discussion about further sampling, so there has been further sampling done, but we have not had a chance to review any of the information yet. So I can't speak to what was found at this point.
Okay, awesome.
But we would probably update the website with additional information.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point to bring up too, is we do have this website. I know Caitlin has shared the links in the chat. Again, we'll send those out to folks too, just so that you know. So in that like main webpage, there's a lot of information, but also in those frequently asked questions, we're trying to add things in there as we get them in, especially if more than one person has these questions. Hopefully it's helpful to all of you to document these things. One of the things that we want to do from this meeting tonight is take some of these questions that you guys have sent in, either in for our preparation for the meeting, some of these which we have, talked about, and then other questions that we're going to get to here in just a few minutes, to add those to those frequently asked questions. So I know I mentioned a little bit earlier that there's definitely things that Tammy's group and Joe's group do not handle. So the asbestos programs for EGLE and MIOSHA are very specific, and although Joe does have a lot more rules than we do, we pretty much have one big one, and he has a lot of different ones. So we wanted to walk you through some of those things that these folks work on a daily basis, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your other questions. So I'm going to walk through some of these that we've been getting in here today. Let me see here. So this question came in, and it goes to like a friable, non-friable sort of question, Tammy. And I know without being on site, we might not be able to answer this, but it says if there's known asbestos, like tiles, ceiling plaster, which are not friable, is this removed before the demolition? And if it's not removed, could it be pulverized during the demolition? Should that material be removed before the demolition? So you talked a little bit about that, but you didn't quite mention if after they do the abatement under the renovation notification, once they get to that demolition notification portion, do they have to remove all of that ACM, all that asbestos containing material before they start demoing?
So for this project, it's my understanding, up until the last survey from 2024, that the contractor is going to remove all friable and non-friable. I believe there's some floor mastic there, and there may be some, I can't remember if it's caulk in the windows or around the doors, but I believe they're removing all of it. Even though if non-friable is not regulated by us, we always like to recommend you take it all.
Right.
If you don't take it all, then during your demolition, you're probably going to have to comply with additional rules under MIOSHA, depending what it is. So.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, MIOSHA, we don't have a requirement to remove any asbestos friable or non-friable prior to demolition. Our rules are geared towards protecting the employees during the removal or exposure.
No, thanks for the clarifications on that, because, one of the questions came in, it's like, and I know that you mentioned this, out of abundance of caution, we always recommend, taking it all out, right? Everything, whether, it's that 65,000 square feet that we talked about, or things like this person asked with tile that's currently non-friable. We always want to have an abundance of caution, but the fact is that the rules are written a specific way. And so if it's something that is outside of the way the rules are written, which the rules are written to be protective, then we can make recommendations, but we can't write a violation notice or something if they don't follow those recommendations. So there was a question that says, well, why make the recommendation then? Well, we do it because we always want to act out of an abundance of caution. But we also are trying to make sure that whenever these things are happening, from a MIOSHA perspective or from an EGLE perspective, that we're following the rules and regulations as they're set out for us. So I know that can be kind of frustrating. And as these things go along, as Tammy mentioned, we're always watching and reassessing. And so the fact is that more sampling can be done. We might come in and say like, no, you need to do something different. So there is it's not like set in stone at day one with a lot of these things. There's a lot of variables, but I appreciate that pushback on, why make those recommendations yet? There was another question, has the demo notification been filed yet? And I think the answer to that is no, Tammy, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I was on here an hour before we started, and I did not see a demolition notification.
Okay, but we
And the
will,
easiest way to search when you go on the public website, I just put in the street address 2065, because I think it's 2065 Cass Lake.
yep.
And that's all I type in, and usually it will pull up what's there.
Yeah, and we can show folks how to do that too. I think on the webpage that Caitlin shared, our Roosevelt Elementary School asbestos page, there's a link right into where those documents are. And like Tammy said, if you just type that in, you'll get those notifications up. And if you have any problems at all using the webpage, please just let us know. You know, we're happy to help walk you through that. Caitlin or myself, we can definitely show you how to get into MyEnviro, which is our system that we use, because it can be a little bit complicated. Okay, so this question came in. So what if there's asbestos in areas that they didn't abate? Will it be caught and addressed to limit air water exposure? So to me, this is like, okay, so let's say we do the abatement portion and we're getting to the demolition portion. There's certain things that they have to do during demolition to minimize dust and things like that. So I don't know if we can maybe talk about this is like second stage type of things when the demolition might be happening. And kind of what we do as far as that perspective goes, Tammy.
So on the notification, there is actually a section on there where a contractor has to fill out, and I'm trying to find that. It's box 13. It says unexpected asbestos. Because sometimes it happens, you think you got it all, you double check, and you hit the building, and occasionally, you know, they'll tear away part of the building and they'll see some missed pipe. And there is a provision that basically says they can contact us, let us know. They can, if it's safe to do that, they can proceed with the abatement. Usually they stop work, they need to wet the material. They'll contact us and revise their notification. If by some chance it was disturbed, then, you know, they would have to keep that area wet and try to isolate that section and have it properly disposed.
And that happens sometimes where you guys are out and you make sure that folks are doing things the way they're supposed to be. If you're identifying other things, you're definitely going to be recommending they do other things. Those notifications, especially one like this, we know this is something that community is very concerned about. So we're going to be looking at that demolition notification as it comes in and making sure that the contractor has all of the elements that are required, again, because it's designed to make sure that that asbestos isn't leaving the facility. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This is another sampling question. So there's some concerns that have come in that the old part of the roof hadn't been tested, or the oldest part or the newer sections of the old school. So a lot of the stuff, I guess, at the old part of the school, I'm not as familiar with that as you all are probably, but I don't know, can we speak to where some of those samples were taken? Were samples taken in those sections? Do we know if there's a plan to have them taken? You know, if this is a miscommunication about where samples were, it'd be great to be able to let folks know that samples were taken there or they weren't, as the case may be.
I can't really speak to that. I know that there were additional samples collected, but we have not had time to review any additional information.
Okay, we can definitely get back on that one too. I can make sure that we can commit to once we get those evaluated, because I know, Tammy, you mentioned that didn't come in until late yesterday, which kind of puts us in a little bit of a time crunch, but we can definitely share that information out once we have a chance to evaluate it a little bit more. I think we were hoping to get that a little bit earlier, but we didn't quite get that yet. Okay, so all right. Okay, just going through some of the questions, I want to make sure that we are answering ones that haven't been answered yet or talked about yet. So there was a question about publishing all the testing on the website, because many people aren't trusting the contractor. So, you know, are we posting some of that? I'm probably not the best one to answer this question. I know there's certain things that go in our MyEnviro portal system sort of automatically, and then there's other things that might be available for FOIA, or we might be able to post separately. Do you know about the sampling results, Tammy? Is that something that's in MyEnviro automatically, or would we have to post that separately?
I would have to check. I'm not sure if it's in MyEnviro.
Okay, let's check on that, because if So I don't know if folks understand our Freedom of Information Act system. We talk about FOIA a lot. And that's where if it's not something that we just normally post online because our system just doesn't work that way, there's a lot of limitations to it. Unfortunately, it's great in some ways, but it's not great in other ways. So if it's not there through the FOIA system, once somebody submits that Freedom of Information Act, then that can be available to anybody who wants to access it. But it's also something that if it's sampling results or things like that, we can talk internally and see if we can just get those posted to make them more easily available for you all. So we'll look into that. I'll make sure that we commit to that. I know Caitlin's listening to some of my promises to folks and helping me document them so we can make sure we get that shared. All right, so we had quite a lot of questions here. One of the questions is just, has the actual abatement started? I know we got some questions in that there was windows that folks were seeing open, generators that maybe weren't running if they were expected to be running. So I don't know if we know if the abatement has started, if it started in like a certain section, and so windows might be open in a different section. So if you guys could speak to that, that would be great.
Yep, I can grab that one. So yes, the abatement did start. As for why windows are open, now for like I mentioned before, they have those negative pressure enclosures that they have to have negative air machines with a HEPA rated filter to scrub that air and dump it outside. So you'll probably see some plastic tubes sticking out of the window. That's how they vent the air out. If just windows are normally open, it might be there for makeup air, because like I said, they're sucking air into those contaminated work areas. So having a nice, easy way for the makeup air to come in. Potentially too, it's hot. It's still, we've had a warm summer. They might just want to breeze. But the work areas are contained. I did make a site visit. I observed the abatement going on. So yes, abatement has started.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for speaking to that. I think what would have been a great idea in hindsight is had we had a visual of a containment area. I've seen these throughout my career doing air quality stuff, and it is pretty impressive how they basically make a room out of plastic, and the personal protective equipment that the workers have to wear is very thorough, with the respirators, with the, proper clothing. And so again, I just want to emphasize there are definitely things in this that are being done to make sure that those fibers aren't leaving the site, right?
I'd also like to address the generator question there.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Speaking with the contractor on site, the school does still have power. They're still building. There is still power throughout the building. Depending on what activity they're doing, like I said, they have to use lots and lots of water when they're doing the abatement. They have to thoroughly wet this material while they're removing it, while they're bagging it. Everything has to stay wet. And since water and electricity don't really mix very well, they're shutting off the power to the classrooms or to the sections of building that they're working in, and are relying on the generator for power in those work areas. So the generator might be off, potentially because they're not needing to utilize it at that particular moment, but they are able to utilize school power for things that need to maintain power, such as those negative pressure machines, those negative air machines. Those have to continue running. They have to stay, those areas have to stay under negative pressure all through the abatement process.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I think I like that you said water and electricity don't mix. Yes, this is true. We don't want other problems out there. So shifting gears a little bit again, there's a couple of things that came in, concerns with WBSD, and I will not remember what that stands for, but I know the two of you do. There's specific questions about room 204 and the asbestos ceiling that collapsed. One of the questions was, why was this not reported? I don't think we can answer why it wasn't reported. So, that's not something that's going to be in our purview. And then there was another question just regarding WBSD, that they aren't returning people's calls. Again, I know that's not something that we have control over. If it's questions that we can answer, of course, we want to attempt to do that. And, hopefully we are doing a fair job of that. So there's another question here, just about the ceiling collapse. Do we know, and I suppose maybe this might be helpful, is that in room 204, I don't remember if the notification, Tammy, that you talked about, and maybe even in revision 4, it talks about room 204. But do we know that whether or not the ceiling was tested in room 204 and if it was considered to be asbestos containing material? There's information in one of these questions that it was 2% asbestos containing, but I'm not sure what the sample results actually showed on that.
I don't know. I can tell you if I look on the notification that room 204 is listed as one of the abatement areas. I don't
Okay.
have the survey or anything else in front of me.
Okay.
I thought it was tested, but I'm not going to say for sure.
Okay, nope, I think we could get back to the person, and I think it's fair to know that room 204 is being abated, at least based on what the notification said. There's a few questions, I guess, in here that are related to contamination risks, impacting local water and sewers. I'm not sure if everyone heard me say this earlier, but that's something that this group of people, and I apologize, we don't have the knowledge to be able to be responsive to those questions, at least in this format right now. We are sort of collecting those questions. We want to get those to folks in our water resources division and some of our other divisions here at EGLE that might be able to be responsive to those. And then we plan to be able to share answers either again on our webpage or directly via email with you too. So I don't want you to think I'm ignoring your questions. I'm just kind of skipping over those because I know we can't really address those right now.
Jennifer, I'd like to add one thing for that one, since they mentioned sewer. Now, like I said, mentioned before, each of the employees are required to shower off before they leave. So, that water is going into the sewer. The shower units are equipped with a filtration system, a multi-filtration system that the water is filtered through before it is dumped into the sewer.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you. I did not know that, so I appreciate you sharing that information with us. Okay, this was a question, and I don't know if you'll know this one, Tammy, or not. We might have to see if Ivan knows, or Steve, but the question was EGLE allowed to take pictures inside the building during their visits? And did we, I guess? I'm not sure if we do that as a matter of course or not.
I think when we went there last year, we did take pictures of the samples we took.
Okay.
You would have to ask Ivan if he took any pictures when he was there. I don't
Ivan,
know.
do you mind coming off mute a minute if you have an answer to that? And if you don't, we can always respond back later.
Case by case basis, just depending on when we need to take photos of certain things to add to our reports, and in certain inspections we have and certain inspections we haven't.
Okay. So if we did take some of these, do you remember if we did when we went out and sampled?
All the photos that were taken would be in the reports in my environment.
In the report? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it. Sorry to put you on the spot on that one, but I appreciate you chiming in. There's also a couple questions here about lead contamination from the paint. Yeah, I mean, this is an old building, so there's probably a lot of different layers of paint on there. Again, and I apologize, we're just not the folks to be able to answer that question, but we are looking at getting answers to those questions. A lot of these, when it comes to like lead paint, things like that, the state's Department of Health and Human Services has a lead paint program. It's a little bit different than ours, but that's something, again, that's on our list to try to get some answers for, but the folks that we have online tonight aren't going to be able to respond to those, so I apologize for that too. All right. Okay, so this is a question again about the sampling results, and it says that the initial sampling results that there was a lot of asbestos, that was likely over 60,000 square feet. Did we receive an initial assessment that WBSD did, and would it not be conservative to remove all of the asbestos? So yes, I mean, the conservative portion, and this question might have come in before you talked about that, Joe. There's a lot of questions, so I'm sorry, I'm kind of going through them and trying to, make them timely and put them together, because I know folks aren't going to want to stay on the meeting all night. So, but this question might have come in before you walked through that you know, at first we thought this, and then this is how they narrowed it down. But I don't know if you could just, you know, talk through that a little
Yeah.
bit again.
Yeah, so
Just to reiterate, in case the person missed it or, you know, we weren't clear.
Yeah. So with this type of material, plaster, it's considered a surfacing material. And given the amount of material at this building, legally they'd only be required to take 7 samples. And inspections and sampling is conducted to prove negative. These things are assumed positive until proven negative through sampling and analytical methods. And so they legally would only need to take 7 samples, but if even one of those samples comes back positive, that means they're all positive. And that's kind of what happened here. They did kind of an initial inspection of the building. They took 30 samples, 10 on each floor, and about 3 came back positive, but those 3 were enough to say it's all asbestos. And so what they did from there is they then went back and did an in-depth sampling plan where they went through, took over 100 samples across those 3 floors, and they got a few more positive samples. And then with that in-depth sampling, they were able to really delineate down which sections of the building actually have positive asbestos-containing plaster, and that's how they were able to reduce it from the whole building down to these specific areas.
Yeah, thanks for walking through that again. I know it definitely was confusing from when we started off in the very beginning of hearing about this project and talking to the elementary school about the potential abatement to where we are today. So this is an interesting question, and I know you talked about this, Joe, that you were out there the other day to do an inspection. So the question was, is the contractor on site doing a good job and meeting or exceeding the requirements during the abatement as far as from your perspective?
Yes, absolutely. I was very impressed with the work that was going on at that facility. I was in the building about a year ago doing a walkthrough, and it was in very poor condition. There was lots of debris on the ground. It was a rough building for sure. The sections, areas that EME are working in, they went through and did a deep clean of these areas. So when you're walking around, you don't see any, dust or debris on the ground. They're going, like I said, they have the manometers on their negative pressure enclosures. They're getting really good negative pressure. They are using 3 machines instead of, I would assume one would probably be enough per classroom, but they have redundancies built in. And then for disposing of their waste, normally most contractors just use double-lined garbage bags. Here they're using cellulose barrels, a much more rigid disposal method. Everything I've seen on site, I think they're meeting the requirements or going above and beyond.
Okay, yeah, thanks for talking through that. I think that will be helpful for some folks too, because it is hard when you're not there watching it happen. This isn't something that folks do every day, so it's really an important part of understanding how this works. Do we have any idea how long the abatement might take? I know we're not there, we're not doing the abatement, but I don't know if we've heard anything that we might be able to share. And if we have, that would be great. Tammy, have you heard anything from the contractors on that?
I haven't. I don't know if Ivan has, but the notification end date, at least for today, is October 31st. So potentially another month.
Yeah, when I was on site about, I think it's 2 weeks ago now, they were estimating approximately 5 more weeks on site. But as they get into these things, as they're doing more intrusive, exploring things, they potentially could uncover more work, and that could potentially extend the abatement time.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for talking through that. So I don't know if this is something that you might know, Joe, too, because you mentioned you were just there. Do you know if room 204 has been abated so far? This is the question that has come in, has it been removed? At least the information was that it had never been removed, so I wasn't sure if you had noticed anything when you were out there.
When I was on site, EME, they were starting from the 3rd floor. They're going to start at the top, work their way down. I did walk the 2nd floor, and they had that room was completely sealed up. They had asbestos hazard warning signs on on that. Couldn't even enter that room unless you were to tear down all those barriers.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so there was another question about when the in-depth sampling was done. So you talked about those, 100 plus samples that were
Yes.
done. Do you know when that actually happened?
Yeah. So in August of 2023 was when that first kind of rough inspection happened, where they only took about 30 samples of the plaster. And then I believe it was April of 2024 is when they came back and did those in-depth sampling.
Okay. Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so we are working to get as many of these questions answered if we can. I know I've been getting some comments that we're not talking through all the questions. So I'm definitely talking through the questions that we have that I know Tammy and Joe can answer. There have been questions about, the lead paint, some questions about wetlands, things like that, that I know our staff aren't, we don't have the background to be able to answer those, but we will definitely get those answered and get information posted online for folks. There's also been a request to post, some of this information online that maybe doesn't always go online, so that everybody doesn't have to go through FOIA, and we'll work to make that happen. I'm apologize if that seemed like I wasn't saying that. That was what I was trying to say, is that we will try to get everything posted online and let you folks know too. As I mentioned in the beginning, we do have our list of folks that we have been emailing updates to and things like that. We're happy to add anybody on that list that may be interested in getting on that list. If that's helpful for folks, we're happy to share information when things are added to the webpage. Just looking through to see if there is a question. So there was a question of, can we delay the demolition? Is that ever possible that we would get a notification that they want to do the demolition, and then we would say, no, you can't, or something like that? What is kind of that process once we get that notification, Tammy, to determine that a demolition can go forward or not?
I mean, we don't approve demolitions, but I will say in general, sometimes we go out and we'll do a pre-demolition inspection, and we might find an issue and we will bring it to their attention, and we would recommend they make the corrections, remove this rackham that we found before you demo, and sometimes that, we'll push the demolition, but we just can't go out and say, you can't demo this building.
Okay.
Even when we find additional regulated asbestos containing materials, we talk to them and they recommend they take care of it. Because if they don't and they start wrecking it, potentially they're in violation.
Right. And so then our enforcement process would be enacted. So, yep. And so that could be frustrating, I think, for people to hear, but I appreciate you, talking through that. So we've done a lot of questions through the chat. So appreciate everybody putting your comments and concerns in there. That was been really helpful. I know we did have some folks that were calling in. I just want to check to see if we still do have that. Yes. So we do have some folks that are calling in. I want to make sure if people have a question we haven't answered so far. I know there's some frustration I'm seeing in the chat of people that aren't feeling like they're getting their questions answered, especially when it relates to things that we can't be responsive to here, or maybe we don't have right in front of us. So I hope that we'll be able to get to all of the questions that we weren't able to answer tonight that had been put in the chat. We'll do our best to get that done and get that, posted online and shared out with folks. But we do have some people that are calling in, and I just want to make sure if we haven't gotten to your questions and you still have questions about things that either Joe handles or Tammy handles, we'll just pause for a moment here and see if anybody would like to ask a question. If you're calling in, you're just going to hit that #2 on your phone so that we can see that you have a question. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I want to just say a big appreciation for everyone coming out tonight. I hope you got some information that you were looking for. I know we weren't able to answer all the questions that everyone had, and I know that can be frustrating. Like I mentioned, we'll do our best to, really try to get to all the questions that we weren't able to answer and get our other folks here at EGLE to help us with answering some of those so that we can get those posted online. Really appreciate that folks took the time to be here. I know there's a lot of other things that you would probably rather be doing than attending this meeting and worrying about this, but we really appreciate the time that the community has had to ask us questions, to submit those questions ahead of time, to listen tonight. Big appreciation for that. I know that there's been some questions about just taking, precautions to protect yourself. We did share some of those things that if folks are concerned, they can do those. Also, you have your Department of Health and Human Services is always a helpful place to go when it comes to that. But again, the work that our EGLE inspectors are doing, that our MIOSHA inspectors are doing to make sure that the contractors are following those letters of the law. The whole intent of that is to make sure that those fibers are not going offsite and impacting people at their homes. So we appreciate the concerns that everyone has had with that. So for right now, there's a couple other things I just want to go over with folks before we sign off for tonight. Just a couple things. I know Caitlin has been sharing stuff in the chat for you, but where can you find more information? So you can find more information about what is our role, what is EGLE's role in demolition projects, what has happened to date. So I know Tammy talked a little bit about what we have done so far, but there's more information about it, more detailed information online. And I'll work to try to get some of those PDFs and some of those reports just posted for people, so it's a little bit easier for people to find things and access that. You can find out more about the asbestos rules and regulations. You can find out how to find those notifications and more information on the project. Like I mentioned, if you are getting stuck on trying to find those notifications and you really just can't figure out how to get there, please don't get frustrated. Just give one of us a call and we're happy to walk you through that. So many of the questions that you all have asked tonight and before we've included on our frequently asked questions. We'll continue to add to that. So that's a great place to go if something pops up and you just, you aren't sure if it's been asked and answered, it might already be there. So visit our webpage, check out our EGLE Asbestos webpage, check out MIOSHA's webpage. Those two links are fairly similar. You can go to michigan.gov/EGLE Asbestos or michigan.gov just asbestos if you want to look more in detail on the MIOSHA rules and regulations. So a little bit about how to file a complaint here. So I know we have some folks on the phone, so I'll kind of talk this out a little bit. If you have a complaint for EGLE folks, something that Tammy's group can take care of, or anything that's related to odors or dust, even outside of what's going on at Roosevelt, you can call our pollution emergency alert system. We also call that our PEAS line. And that line is 1-800-292-4706. You can also file a complaint through MyEnviro through our system online. If you don't want to pick up the phone and call, that's also totally fine. MIOSHA, if you have a complaint or concern, you can give them a call at 517-284-7680. So again, just to reiterate, they are handling worker safety type of things. So if you see a concern, I know we had folks bring up the concerns about windows being open and generators not being run. So if folks have concern about worker safety at the site, that's definitely a number that you can call. We have a little bit more information on here about who you can contact if you have further questions. So I know you met him very briefly, Ivan. He is one of the inspectors for this facility. So if you have questions about the abatement project from an EGLE perspective, or even if you aren't sure if it's EGLE or MIOSHA, you can give Ivan, send him an email. His email is bell, B-E-L-L, the letter I, at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. You can also directly email Joe if you have questions too, and his email address is his last name, which is Savage, and it's S-A-V-E, D as in dog, G-E, the letter J, at Michigan, all spelled out, .gov as in government. And if you really don't want to mess with any of those and you really just want like one, number to call, you're going to want to call or one place to go, our EGLE Assist at michigan.gov is the best place. So that's just EGLE- the word assist at michigan.gov. All right. So again, want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. This was really great to have folks on. Really appreciate the time, energy, and the information. So a couple things before we close out, just to let you know, Caitlin DeVries will be sending a follow-up email. So again, anyone who we already had on our email list, everyone who registered for this meeting tonight, if you're calling in, send us an email if you can. We're happy to add you to this list. We will be sending out to you a link to the recording of this meeting. You will also get a PDF of the slides. I know folks had asked for that as well. And then Caitlin will send you any of the links and information that we talked about. So if you didn't get a chance to jot it down, folks' email addresses, phone numbers, how to file complaints, etc., all of that, the rule citations, because I know I don't remember those, all of that will be included for you, either in that PDF of the PowerPoint that we'll be sending or the recording. So you will have that. I really appreciate, again, everyone joining us tonight. Hopefully you got some information that was helpful for you. And if you didn't learn anything tonight, I think that's great. Then you probably had a lot of knowledge that you were basing your information on and bringing to the meeting tonight. So that probably led to a lot better questions for other folks to learn more. So appreciate all of you. And Caitlin, whenever you're ready, if you want to go ahead and end the meeting, that would be wonderful. Thanks, everybody.